Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar, brought to you by TechStrong. My name is Cody J. Brown, and I'm the host of TechStrong Learning. We have an exciting panel ahead, but before we begin, I have just a few housekeeping notes. First, today's session is being recorded, so if you miss any of the event, or you'd just like to share it with a friend, the on-demand will be made available after the webinar concludes today. On the right side of your screen, you'll see a couple tabs, the first one being the Q&A tab. Here's where we want you to submit any questions that you have during today's discussion. I imagine that our speakers, this being a panel discussion, will be looking at that questions tab frequently. So if you have a relevant question, be sure to get it in. If you use that chat tab, which is right next to it, this is where we want you to engage with one another. Give us your thoughts on today's discussion, or just tell us where you're tuning in. And finally, at the conclusion of today's webinar, we will have a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So our topic today is just simply GitOps. And I'm joined today by Scott Gerlach, co-founder and chief security officer at StackHawk, Tommy McClung, CEO and co-founder of Release Hub, Andy Suderman, director of R&D and technology at Fairwinds, Victor Gemov, principal developer advocate at Kong, and Mike Vizard, Chief Content Officer of TechStrong Group and our moderator for today's discussion. It is my pleasure to turn the floor over to Mike at this point in time. Mike, thank you so much for being here.
All right, thank you for having me, and thank you all for joining us today. We've got a distinguished panel here to talk about GitOps, and to be honest, a lot of people don't really know exactly what GitOps means just yet. Some people are doing a flavor of GitOps. It's kind of like DevOps in some regards. It's in the eyes of the beholder. So let's dive in here and kind of sort this out a little bit. I'm going to, first of all, I want to just check one thing. Tommy, can you hear us, or you are on audio only, right?
No, I got you. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Anyway, we'll come back.
Yeah, we can hear you.
You can.
You can hear me? Yeah, I can hear you.
Well, all right. We'll see. Come back to that. Let's just jump in here for a minute, though, and go with Andy. I mean, there's no right answer here, I think, but what's your definition of what is GitOps? What does it mean to you? What's the concept? And maybe how does it differ from what we think about DevOps?
That's a good question. I think there's a lot of different definitions out there. I think the one that I tend to start out with when having a discussion like this or presenting to other folks is I go back to Weaveworks and their original definition of GitOps, which is actually a very long webpage, and I can't summarize in necessarily 30 seconds. But I would say, if I were to try to distill that down, I would say GitOps is really a system by which your desired system state is declared in Git. And that's probably overly simplified, but I think it's an okay place for us to start.
Victor, do you agree? You're kind of a developer folk. What does that mean to you as a term? Is it just an opinionated instance of DevOps, or is it something different?
I would add to Andy's point is that it not necessarily needs to be Git. Git is a de facto standard right now for version control, but your desired state needs to be stored somewhere under version control. And the process around delivering software will be built around this, like a custom state. There should be someone somewhere that we agree upon. And usually the version control is something that developers and the managers and architects can agree upon. Like there's something that will hold desired state of the system. And at this point, it also affects the way, when I said we deliver software, means that it also affects people. So meaning that it also affects culture. So I think it's one of the practices that we use to improve the adoption of DevOps as a practice. I would say that GitOps is one of the practices that we use at the DevOps culture.
Scott, do you agree with that? And I know you come with a little more security background. Maybe is there such a thing as GitSecOps? Is that something we're going to see at some point? Is that part of this conversation, or where are we going with that? And what is the benefit from a security perspective?
Yeah, first of all, God, please no. Please not another jam security into the middle of it because we got left behind. Hopefully what happens is GitOps, DevOps, all these things just start incorporating security the way that they're supposed to be doing. That's part of testing, part of operation, part of monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. And the GitOps part of that is secure configuration by default, right? So as you're doing declarative stuff in GitOps to say, here's what an EC2 instance looks like, or here's what a Google instance looks like, and here's the secure defaults that go along with that. That's all just part of GitOps. The challenge there, obviously the reason we did that is to be faster. And if you can be faster by going, here's how to declare the state and the code and the, as much stuff as you can in code, then everyone's kind of on the same page. If you have to do a bunch of rework in that, it doesn't make it faster. So everyone hopefully gets to be involved at the right time to be able to make this operate functionally and quickly, right? So that people can deliver value to customers in a short period of time in that agile method that we're shooting for here.
Victor, in my experience, at least in the land of DevOps, most folks did pretty well with the notion of continuous integration. I think the idea of continuous delivery, though, has proved more challenging, shall we say. Everything is a snowflake. It's very hard to automate.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I can't help but wonder if GitOps itself is just a second crack at this continuous delivery conversation. And this time, for sure, we're going to try to get it right. And some of this has to do with the rise of cloud native and Kubernetes. But do you think that in some ways this is a separation of CI and CD in a way that makes the latter more accessible or approachable?
This is a very good question, Mike. So I think the idea of GitOps, it's definitely have continuous delivery in mind. So once you have this state changed in your version control, things need to start happening. Your CI pipeline will start, running things, and the system that allows you to synchronize those state with your desired state in your Kubernetes cluster or any cluster for that matter, that will drive the immediate reaction. So if you change the state, this needs to be reflected in something that your customers and the users will start using. Or if you doing this for, I don't know, like a developer environment, the developers also will see this. So I would say that's one of the tools that we start adopting to increase the practices of continuous delivery. It's in my opinion, it's just a great place to be when you understand that something that you have in version control, this is something that you will have running in your environment at some point. The eventual consistency in distributed systems, it's always a factor here. But in general, the metaphor is that you need to, you will see it like almost immediately.
Andy, do you agree with that? I mean, is it primarily just infrastructure, or is the whole deployment model going to be managed out of Git? It'll be the code, the infrastructure. And if so, how does it, in your mind, change the way a DevOps team may need to operate as a result?
Yeah, I mean, to answer the first part, I definitely agree with that. I think it will be one of the key tools to maybe actually seeing continuous delivery become a thing. I think the biggest blocker for continuous delivery has been fear and uncertainty and doubt. And as a developer, if I'm put on my developer hat for the day, I can look and feel a little bit more comfortable. If I see that change that's getting automatically deployed, I see the entire diff in my version control system. I know exactly what's going to change. It's not this mysterious process by which I throw my code out there and then eventually it ends up somewhere running. Like, I know what it's going to look like when it gets there. And so I think it will be a tool to reduce that fear of actually doing continuous delivery. And as far as whether it applies to just infrastructure or development, I think it applies to the whole stack. I think, there's no reason that if you're doing, GitOps at the infrastructure level, you shouldn't also be doing it for your software delivery. The patterns might be slightly different. The way that you utilize it might be slightly different, but I think there's no good reason to not do it for both. And as far as how it affects, the way DevOps teams operate, hopefully it makes our lives easier, quite frankly. I've been doing some GitOps things around, with my internal infrastructure here, and it really does simplify the ways in which I'm deploying things into Kubernetes clusters, into other environments. So I'm hoping that it makes the DevOps people's job more the consultant, right? The consultant role of here's what it should look like to deploy, not I need to go write all this automation to deploy your code. The automation's there. It's our GitOps tooling. It exists. Now we need to talk about process and best practices of how you're writing your declarative state of your system that you're deploying into the cluster.
Scott, do you have any insight as to why this might be all finally coming to a head? We've been talking about CI and CD now for the better part of a decade or more. Is there something going on that makes GitOps in particular a much more compelling conversation at the moment?
Yeah, I think, the original idea was to abstract away blockers in the deployment pipeline. So the operations team that has to spin up a VM in vSphere or bare metal server to be able to push code onto. The whole idea is like abstract all this stuff so that it's instrumentable and actionable via API. And the more that you can get that into, the more you can instrument that with code, the faster and faster you are. The whole point, once again, is just to be quick to deliver value to customers and quick to deliver fixes and keep doing it over and over and over again. And undoing those roadblocks is what this is all about, so that you don't have to go, all right, I'm ready to deploy, but I got to submit a ticket to the ops team to spin me up a VM. Or I'm ready to deploy, but someone has to go babysit Jenkins. Maybe that happens anyway because Jenkins. But, those kinds of things, being able to instrument that in code, whether it's YAML or some declarative state, right, makes it faster to get value out the door. That's the whole point.
All right, cool. All right, I think Tommy's audio is fine. Tommy, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So, Tommy, we'd love to get your opinion about what does GitOps represent in terms of a shift? Is it just an opinionated form of DevOps, or is something more profound going on here? And what's your sense of what's going on?
Well, I kind of look at it like, the shift to Agile, right? It's like mentioned before, it's a philosophy, a cultural change. It's a tooling change.
Tommy, you with us?
Yeah. Everybody can hear me, right? Yep.
Yeah, I can hear you.
It's a tooling change. It's an approach that the
You
organization.
can hear Tommy, but I cannot. Is that what you guys are saying?
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's an organizational change that needs to happen. Getting your infrastructure declarations and your code next to each other. I think the thing about GitOps that most people kind of hand wave over is what you guys were talking about, which is the CD side of things. All of the declarative, however you store your state of what the infrastructure should look like. Now the CD part of it is the challenge, like making that real and making that manifest itself inside of your environments is typically the piece that, that's the end state and the goal. But the state of the world today is kind of figure that out on your own. And so, I think ultimately it's going to simplify and get faster delivery. But in reality, it's a lot of tooling. And a question that came up is what's the difference between GitOps and DevOps? I still think today DevOps is a huge player that needs to be involved so that tooling can actually be real. And so, today what we're seeing is DevOps teams owning that GitOps workflow, enabling the organizations, but still heavily involved because the automation still needs to take place. Can you hear me now? Hopefully you can hear me now.
I can not only hear you, but I can see you, which is fabulous. Great.
All right, great.
All right. All right. So I think we're all caught up to speed on the general reason of GitOps and where we are. From your perspective, I'm going to just add Tommy to add one more thing there. Will we continue to attempt to have these integrated CI/CD platforms? And I'm asking the question because we bought a lot of these platforms, but didn't always use the CD side of it. Or will there be a separate CI platform and a separate CD platform? And they'll be more loosely coupled, and that's how it might work? Or what's going to be the approach?
Well, I think, we were just talking about this. The CD side of it is actually the harder part of the equation, right? Getting your code declared, your infrastructure declared, definitely doable. And all the responsibility kind of falls on the DevOps teams to figure out how to stitch all of this together. I do think we're going to see platforms, that emerge that kind of bridge the gap, bring them together. But today, I think what you're going to see is a lot of CI tooling that, you leverage to run your tests and automation, And then the CD half of it is still kind of left up to the beholder to figure out. I think in the future, those two things are going to bridge together. But today we're still kind of in this disparate state of technologies that people are trying to figure out how to make work.
All right. So Victor, I think what he's saying is that we still live in the land of dev and ops. And maybe we want to get to this more DevOps thing. And so how long will it take us to do that? And are some organizations just better at it than others? What makes it work?
So I think that what makes it work is the how far you in the journey of automating everything. So how much you relying on a human factor when you deploying your software, and how much you relying on automation. So it's a big shift from perspective of mindset, because of the, you need to trust to, do the tools and make sure this, there's a mindset, like if something it makes you, some makes painful, you need to do it often in order to develop either ways how to avoid this, or develop some sort of like a strength against this. So if you're trying to understand something better, try to automate this. If you try to understand your development process or deployment process, just try to automate this. And it really depends on the time, how much people spending to pushing the changes today. Like if it's a days, well, probably it will take them years to get there. If it's a minutes, probably they're already on the right path to automate everything. The things that I guess Tommy mentioned, where we have this like a major disconnect between the integration and deployment, is that we always somehow we're forgetting about the artifacts, because continuous integration provides us some binary artifacts that needs to manifest in our infrastructure. And the modern tools, they kind of sort of not fully factor this in. You can define those versions, but those versions needs to come from somewhere. And in this case, you have a continuous integration. A result will be placed in some sort of like artifactory management system. It's going to be a Docker registry, or it's going to be some sort of like a, I don't know, the Maven Central if you're in the Java world. And after that, from this, the thing that will be deploying to deliver this will take those artifacts and bring this. So that's even like a third factor we need to put this, a third tool, I would say, is artifact management.
Yeah, and one thing that I would add to that, one of the reasons why I think the CD side of it is difficult, especially when you talk about GitOps, is a lot of time you're defining infrastructure, and you want to see that infrastructure manifested in your cloud or wherever it might end up being. So you define that, but testing of that is actually incredibly difficult. So testing code we've been doing for years and years and years since I started writing software. But testing a declarative change in your infrastructure and ensuring that declarative change actually manifests itself in the actual environment that you want it to be in, and testing to make sure that works is incredibly hard. So there's a bit of hesitation to like, oh, what's going to happen when I make this infrastructure change? How do I know that infrastructure change is going to work? So I think that the testing in and around kind of the infrastructure side of this is also an area that needs a lot of maturity, so that when I say, hey, I need a new S3 bucket, or I need something in my infrastructure, there's a high level of certainty and guarantee that it's going to turn out the way that I want it, and you had the ability to test that before you put it in front of users. So that whole ecosystem is nascent, it's starting to figure out how to make that work, and we're still in the early days there.
Scott, what is your sense of how that ecosystem is going to look? Because today we see developers are provisioning infrastructure. They have all kinds of tools to do that. They're not especially security experts. We seem to, as a result, get a lot of misconfigurations, and ports are left open, and we call it progress. So how is this going to help? Will GitOps help close that loop a little bit in a way that will result in more secure cloud infrastructure?
Yeah, I think it's hilarious that we always expect somehow developers to be security experts. That's not what we want them to do. We want them to be developers, and we want them to make smart decisions based on the information that we're giving them. And what we do is give them terrible information, and they make bad decisions. So hopefully we can continue to feed them good information so they can make smart decisions. All of these cloud infrastructure providers are secure by default. What we do is either abstract away too much stuff and make it hard, or we don't give them enough information and make it unknowable what's going to happen here. And then that's when bad things happen. So S3 buckets are private by default. And then when you go, well, what do you want it to do? I don't know. Public. There's where the problem steps in. So, I think as long as an industry, we continue to get better information into people's hands so they can make smart decisions. And that happens across the board. That happens with what kind of EC2 instance do you want? How do you want your Kubernetes cluster to run? How do you want this application to run? How secure should it be? How, all of that stuff, as long as we're delivering good information so people can make smart, active decisions, we're in a much better place, because now you've got people making decisions about things, and it runs into a product team, right? That product team is making the decision, not somebody that lives in a castle somewhere off to the side that gets looped in every, once a month or something and goes, wait, what did you guys do? And then shuts everything down. And then the other thing I think is going to happen is you're going to see two things. Most of the CI/CD stuff has become pretty platform, or came out pretty platform, and like kind of missed that CD thing. So I think you're going to start seeing some specialization in domains. So you'll have some CD stuff that works really well for your business, and a CI provider that is maybe different. And then probably come back and consolidate in platform again. So breaking apart those domains so people can get really good at, what does CD look like in my environment? Is it blue-green deploys? Is it feature flags? Is it dark deploy? Is it like all this stuff that is really hard to make CD work? Somebody's going to go focus on that, and then that'll get pulled back into a larger platform to make it super easy for people.
So that's part of that natural cycle of specialization and then consolidation that we see just about in every IT trend, and we should expect to see the same. Andy, let me ask you something. Do you think that the focus on software supply chains and security is going to have this kind of cause and effect issue where people are going to look more at GitOps because of a security concern? And is that going to be a front of mind motion, or is it just going to be kind of a happy accident on the back end where people are going to wake up one day and go, by golly, we did this GitOps thing and magically things got more secure?
Oh, you had to ask me the security question. I was just watching a talk by Bruce Schneier the other day, a webinar that he did with Teleport, and basically just talking about how the internet was built to not be secure, or not built with security by default, and so how we're all just kind of we're all up a creek without a paddle, as you might say, in that department. So to answer your question, I don't think GitOps will inherently make us better at security. I think, we are going to have to keep being mindful and giving good information, like Scott just said, and making smart decisions earlier on in the process as much as we can. But I don't think GitOps inherently does that. It does provide some security benefits that you get, in that it makes it a little bit easier, with a pull versus a push model, to lock down your environments, make it so that people don't have access to them, do some sort of infrastructure level security a little bit easier. But I don't think inherently it makes anything more secure. And in fact, there's other sides of the coin where it encourages bad patterns, because the state is entirely in your version control. You're going to have this natural tendency to put your secrets in your version control. Well, maybe we shouldn't do that, right? Maybe we should be doing secure secrets management. So inherently, no, I don't think it will. I think it's an important thing we should all think about.
I would like to add one thing to the thing that Andy just said about putting the secrets in version control. So the GitOps tools provide the ways how we can actually put the secrets in version control. So in this case, we don't need to overcomplicate our infrastructure. But in many cases, it's the problem not with the tooling, but with education. People don't understand in what form we're putting the secrets stored in encrypted with keys only available for operator that will be, but operator, I mean like the software that will be deploying this, and no one else will be able to decrypt this secret. Anyone who wants to exploit this, they can try this, but it will take them ages to crack this encrypted secret. So it's kind of two things. But it definitely, I agree with Andy, it definitely allows to, and Scott at this matter, to think about security on the first place, not as an afterthought. And the problem is always in education. The Scott said we have a private by default S3 bucket. Now we open this public, but maybe there is a more flexible mechanism. But we didn't know this. We only knew only two mechanisms, plus and minus, like open and close. That's it.
Yeah. Tommy, let me ask you something as it relates to this. Do you think that the rise of GitOps coincides with the rise of cloud native and Kubernetes and microservices, and that's what's creating this moment in time for us to revisit the whole DevOps question and how it's handled? Or will we apply GitOps to monolithic and legacy stuff as well, and there won't be this distinction? So, what is the cause and effect of Kubernetes?
Well, at the end of the day, these applications are getting more complex, more distributed. The nice part about the cloud is you have all of these amazing technologies at your disposal, so the applications can do more and more. So I definitely think the complexity of applications is forcing this need to get your arms around it. And GitOps is a way to be declarative and say, hey, this is what my application looks like. Here's how I want it to behave. Here's the security that I want to have in this application. And it is a result of years of developers trying to figure out how to get their arms around infrastructure in these more and more complex applications. So I think it is a function of what's going on with the cloud. I don't think it really has much to. I mean, Kubernetes obviously is is a buzzword. Everybody talks about it. We use it at release to kind of do our environment stuff. But I don't think it really has much to do with that, other than it's another complex piece of technology that sits in the ecosystem now, and we need to get our arms around it and manage it. So the idea of putting all of that configuration and infrastructure definition within your source control, there's a lot of benefits even on the security side, where now all of those definitions can be scanned. We can look for anomalies before they actually go live. I really think GitOps is a philosophy that allows us to get our arms around the complexity of distributed applications. It's a tool that can be used to make that happen, but it needs to be married with a philosophy. It needs to be married with the right automation, everything going around it. And one thing is for certain, applications aren't going to get simpler moving forward. They're going to continue to get more and more complex as the clouds become more available and more complex themselves. And so I think this is a natural kind of, okay, how do we get our arms around this? How do we manage this step in the evolution of technology right now?
Right. We have a question from one of our attendees. I'm going to paraphrase it, but it's Kenneth O. And he's asking if it's a philosophy, some might call it a cult, whatever it is, but he's asking, where do I get support? How do I join? Where does one become a member of GitOps? I don't know. Victor, you got any thoughts about where would you point somebody?
I think everything needs to be started with learning a little bit about the what's the WeWorks idea was, and after that start exploring particular tools. Right now, there's two most famous tools that people use in Kubernetes is Argo or Flux, and they are having like similarities, but I would say just like go learn, explore, and see what's it's more more works in your infrastructure or your environment. Like there's different similarities and there's some differences. Like Flux, like one thing, Argo has like a more modular structure, and the approach how you customize your deployment might be different, and it's just a matter of like picking up something that you would be comfortable with. I'm not sure about actual if this user is listener asking about the commercial support, but those tools have pretty good open source community. They both projects in CNCF Foundation, and they have very good the ways how you can reach out and ask questions and see how you can solve your particular problems. But it's something that you need to try do something yourself, or at least like assign some of the team member if you're a manager trying to get into this one to research, because once you start using the thing and you will start to see benefits, that's where the mindset will start, some of the gears will start shifting.
Right. This isn't always somebody's favorite subject, but let me ask Andy, since he gets all the hard questions. am I going to see like people with GitOps certifications and they're going to have that as a job rec from an HR department? Or is this just going to be something that within the IT community, we look to see if people have GitOps experience, but we're not going to have this hard and fast kind of, show me your GitOps certification to pass the front door.
I mean, it's definitely going to happen, right? I mean, it's happened with every piece of new, cloud native tech that I can think of that's gotten really big. So I mean, I think that will be a thing. Whether it will hold weight or not, I don't think so. A lot of DevOps certifications, a lot of cloud certifications, a lot of those things really, they're a good starting place. It's something that you can do to maybe get some information, but really I think it's going to come down to who has the experience, who's done it, how are we teaching it internally? How are we, adopting the process and getting folks up to speed on how to set up good GitOps patterns. I think, Scott probably summarized the entire landscape of what we do as, technologists, in that we have to educate each other better. Like there's just so much complexity. There's just so much out there, and we just have to continue to teach.
All right. Tommy, well, that brings us to our next question, which is also from George J. And he's asking, is there some place, if you can't afford to set up your own Kubernetes cluster, where you can go and play around with GitOps and get some experience? And, is there a cloud thing that people can go find and say?
Well, I'm going to be a self promoter here. You can do it on releasehub.com. I think the whole concept here is, and I think Andy, you said this really well. Like you got to play around with this, and GitOps is in kind of the eye of the beholder as well, right? Like how much are you going to check in? How much is declarative? And then what's going to happen when I make a change? Like all of those things are still kind of open-ended questions for whatever team is implementing this pattern to kind of figure out. Now, if you want to go play around, you can go into release, you can create an account, you can put some apps in there, you can turn the GitOps features on. And I think what you'll find in doing that, and this is not self-serving, I think this is a reality, is that especially when you start talking about, let's say you've got an application, you got 20, 30 developers on it, it's GitOps enabled. Somebody creates a branch, the declarations of that infrastructure in a branch, somebody makes a change on that branch, what do you do? Like, do you deploy it automatically? Do you, only deploy it when it merges back to master? Like all of these rules and policies about the behavior is something that you're going to need to kind of custom tailor into your workflow. And so even this idea that there's going to be a certification of it, I mean, like, what are you even certifying, right? You're certifying that you know how to check code in, that you know how to use Git flow, which are common development practices. Every organization that adopts GitOps is going to have some sort of rules on what do we do when this happens, right? And so I think there, like Andy mentioned, or Victor, you mentioned Argo, Flux, all of these tools kind of give you the ability to kind of tinker, but the rubber meets the road when you have to really do it for a real application. And so I think getting an application fully up and running somewhere, release or wherever, and then playing around with all of these behaviors that are going to unfold when certain changes happen is really how you're going to educate yourself. Because if you go read about GitOps, it's all over the place. Like this conversation, like it's all over the place. Like it's still kind of this nebulous idea. And the only real way to get your arms around it is to use something to play around with it. And, feel free to use Release if you'd like, or other tools. There's a lot of open source stuff out there too you can use.
All right. So Victor, let me follow up on that idea with you, because I have to ask myself, are people going to get out of bed in the morning with a plan that says I'm going to go do GitOps? Or is it going to be more like I have code in my Git repository, and then we wrote some infrastructure as code stuff and we stuck that in the repository, and then we started melding all this stuff together, and they'll do that for a couple of months, and someone will come along and tell them that, that's GitOps, and they'll say, look at that, Ma, no hands, I'm doing GitOps. I mean, how deliberate process is this going to be, or will it just kind of evolve over time?
I think it will evolve because everything, if you're doing something in a big bang, nothing going to happen. In this case, people will still have this like a fear, uncertainty, and doubts about the things if they're like they need to validate stuff. But once you start in declarative way, so you say in the Kubernetes, you already have a set of your like deployment manifest, or even maybe you start using some tools that allow you to templatize this. You can use Customize, or you using Helm for that matter. You're already much further on automation than many people, and only thing is missing that they're replacing. By replacing, I don't mean anything bad, but replacing the manual link when you do kube control apply, and after that, or do Helm install stuff. But you, rather than having someone or like some of the controller that sits inside your cluster, and as Andy mentioned, it has like a pull instead of pushing model. When you have the operator, person operator, you always do in push model. You take the stuff that in this operator computer and push it to infrastructure. When this with the GitOps approach, it's more like, okay, so there's something new happened in this repository. Let me pull these changes and materialize them as a thing. So yeah, I think the starting from point where you you understand how you want it to be, and after that you do some automations, and after that you changing this kind of switch. Okay, I trust my tooling to the point that I'll allow to do this automated pull. But absolutely agree with Tommy's point with the it needs to be tailored to organization. There are some patterns, and people love patterns. That's why we have the famous books about design patterns, enterprise integration patterns, all this kind of stuff. Patterns will give you ideas, but actual implementation is behind your engineering team, SRE team. So because they need to tailor this to your organization. As the Conway law says, every distributed or every organization structure will be mimicked into information system organization. If you have this agility in organization and the flow between your departments, it would be much easier to automate this process and put this in place as a part of the pipeline.
Right. Andy, I'm a simple guy, and Victor was kind of pushing on this a little bit, but I want to clarify a point a little bit and say, if I look back in time and I look at DevOps and CI, basically you pushed code from your CI out to the target platform and hoped for the best. And if we look at GitOps, one way to think about it is to say that the target platform will look to the repository and pull code when it's told it's ready, and that the whole motion is just opposite of what we used to do at CI and CD. So at its basic core is GitOps kind of just flipping the relationship, and instead of pushing, we're pulling, and that's one way to think about it.
I mean, fundamentally, yes. The real definition of GitOps, like very basic, is pull versus push. But that doesn't really change anything from the perspective of writing code. I'm still pushing my code into the repository. But as you go down that process of switching to a pull model, it will, I think, it was both Victor and Tommy who kind of talked about this a little bit, but like you start to get those gears turning, and it changes your mindset by shifting that the way that's going. It starts to make you think about how you do those things a little bit differently, and adds great opportunities for automation.
All right, Scott, shift in mindsets. So what will be the role of the IT ops and the security guys going forward? I mean, developers have been after trying to code IT operations people out of existence for a long time now. That's part of their mindset, right? They're basically telling these guys, please get out of the way as much as you can. We're going to program this stuff. But to what degree then is the IT operations people and the security people, what's their job?
Yeah. I think you got to think of them like members of the team. So the whole idea is to automate away the need for them to do clicky, right? It's not to automate them and get rid of them because they're not valuable. Their value lies in the consultative nature of what they do and what they know. So you can't go, by the way, you can't just hire someone that does DevOps and then boom, you're DevOps. You can't just hire someone that does GitOps and then boom, GitOps. These are things you do as an organization, not things you hire. So anyway, there's that. And part of doing that is bringing those specializations in to make that process automated and flow with the rest of the engineering product development lifecycle, and not just get rid of them, right? The idea is not to get rid of the security team. The idea is to bring the security team in and get them to help you make things faster and safer. And I have this great analogy I've used. I worked at GoDaddy a long time ago. We sponsored race cars. If you go to like a NASCAR race or an IndyCar race, or pretty much any race that's not just like out in the street in Denver, there's a safety crew there, and their job is not to make people go slower. Their job is to make people go faster safely. So their job is to make sure that people that pay, customers, to come see the race don't get killed by debris flying off into the stands. And their job is to make sure that people that are racing the cars don't get injured or hurt when they crash. They want to be able to go as fast as possible safely and not die. That's the whole point of a safety team at a racetrack. And that's the whole point of an operations team and a security team and all those other specializations in a DevOps or a GitOps shop. Their whole point is to help you go faster safely. So I think, the idea that we're trying to get rid of operations people and get rid of security people is incorrect. We're trying to change what they do to help enable the organization.
Victor,
I'll
do you agree
drink
with
to
that?
that. Yeah, I would drink to that. That's the very, very wise words, and I think I would, I would die for this, saying that yes, we're not trying to get rid of the operations people. Yeah, we developers can develop our way around the things, but it's a collaboration, and the people needs to work closely to get best results rather than kind of like putting sticks in each other wheels and things like that. So that's very good to think. That's not to get you slower but get you faster, safer. That's fantastic takeaway from this.
All right. So we're not having a Ralph Nader moment where we're unsafe at any speed, right? Is that the issue? We're going to kind of...
Hopefully not.
Tommy, there's a question from the audience. Sandro G wants to know, and fair question is, GitOps in some level sounds like, it's just another extension of the Agile manifesto. And so what's the big deal? What's the change here? What do I got to think about? We're already thinking about this stuff.
I don't necessarily disagree. I think it is, because prior to this, I was the CTO of a public company, and we went through a pretty massive Agile transformation there. We were waterfall deploying everything. We moved to the cloud. We put a lot of our code infrastructure as code in place, and that was in support. All of that tooling and all of the technical migration was in support of Agile. And so I think the thing that I learned in going through that big transformation was Agile as a philosophy is let's iterate quickly so that great ideas can, come up in the cycle of, product development. But if your infrastructure underneath the covers does not allow for that, it's too rigid. You can't deploy fast enough. The feedback loops aren't there. The data's not there. Then you're really doing waterfall with Agile ceremonies sitting on top of it. And so when we went through that transformation, we realized very, very quickly that if our technology didn't support Agile, it wasn't going to work. And I think GitOps is another technology that ends up ultimately supporting an Agile philosophy. That's why we kind of talked about GitOps as a philosophy at the beginning of this. If your developers want to move really fast, but they've got to wait 2 weeks for the DevOps team to spin up something that you need in order to build your new feature, you're not actually moving quickly at all. And by codifying that, putting it into source, and then creating the proper CDE pipelines around all of that infrastructure, now your product development teams, your product management teams, your business can move quicker in that real traditional Agile way. But without the tooling, you can't do it. And I think GitOps is really an answer to that, or at least an attempt at a piece of the answer to that, in addition to the cultural changes that need to happen in an organization to pull it off. So yeah, in some ways, I completely agree. And I've spent the last 7-8 years of my life working on that exact problem, wanting Agile, but realizing I can't have Agile unless the technology underneath the covers supports it. And I think GitOps is a step in that direction.
All right. Victor, let me ask you something about standardization versus, I guess, developer freedom. But A lot of CIOs will sit there and say, we want a standard platform, single vendor, it's lower cost, it's easier to deal with. But if I have true GitOps and I'm just pulling stuff from the repository, does it really matter if I have one repository versus another, so long as they're all somewhat Git centric, maybe, and at least I have that capability? And will I see more diversification of different types of repositories as we go along, if that makes any sense to you?
In my opinion, it does matter. So we already passed that line when we were in the big wars between different version control systems. There was a SVN versus CVS. We were at the Git versus Mercurial and things like that. There's some still obscure version control system that are available, and maybe some tools need to support it. But in general, let's face it, like Git is everywhere. Either if you're using this in providers like GitHub or using GitLab as a provider, you have it installed this GitHub Enterprise in your organization or whatnot. It's there. So I don't see a reason why this stuff needs to be debated any further. It's already there, so let's stick with this one. So I think the Git as a tooling, it provides great capabilities to do all possible agile stuff. We have at least like 4 or 5 different the patterns how the people can work with Git. It can be the traditional as a kind of like a trunk based deployment, Git flow, some other things that like a feature branches, or like a branch per Jira, or whatever. So Git does support all of this. You can do whatever you want. It's just like matter how your organizations and team would be productive. If they like to do trunk based deployment, everything will go to master, and only from master it goes into production. If they want to have a branches for different environments, it's also fine. It's also possible. So answer to your question, yes, we standardize, and Git is our standard. But again, still flexibility to do whatever you want with the tool.
Tommy, do you agree with that? It's not so much about the platform anymore as much as it is the workflow and how you approach that and manage that, and what's underneath, maybe not so much of a concern.
I definitely think we've standardized on Git. I think that war is over. I'm sure something will emerge in the future that's better, but at the moment, that's the best that there is. And I think all of the patterns in and around how you manage source and everything is there. I do think there's going to be a really big difference in I still come back to this point of like, hey, when you make your changes in Git, what do you do? Do you audit, like you said, hey, if it goes to master, you go straight to prod. Maybe feature branches, create environments. All of those things, they're really tricky. Like those, especially when you start, and we deal with this at release, there's an environment created for every single pull request. And so now we have environments for every single change that's going on. And now we have different configurations running on infinite numbers of environments that are running simultaneously. So I think the answer to like what happens next is really going to be in the eye of what works best for the team, right? And you asked about repositories. We see this a lot where infrastructure is in one repo, code is in another, and so now they've already created a separation. Some customers that are using GitOps for us separate their infrastructure repositories and their code repositories. Some teams merge those two things together. They're side by side right next to each other. Both of those approaches are using GitOps. It's just it's a different way to solve the problem that works best for the team. And I tend to think that there will be more patterns, more platforms, more things like release coming out that make it kind of a standard approach that you can solve all of these problems. But you're still, I think the next battle is going to be like, what are those patterns? What are those best practices? And how do you make sense of that as a team? Because this is not an easy decision for any engineering team. They have to come in, they have to decide what is our workflow, what pattern best supports our workflow. Then they got to go try it, right? And then they realize, oops, that wasn't right. Let's go back to the drawing board and start over. So even the GitOps workflow has to be agile. Otherwise, you get so deep into it, you realize, hey, what we did didn't work. And we see that a lot with our customers. They want to jump into GitOps and then they realize, oops, that was not exactly what we were looking for. Let's go this way. Let's go that way. So it's tricky.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point in terms of like you cannot be dogmatic about this. it's all about, learn and try and see what works. If something doesn't work, it's agile thing. You do a short iteration, you see that works, you continue. If it doesn't, just throw away and move on.
Yeah.
That's perfect, Tommy. Thank you.
All right, don't get too obsessed about your patterns. Gentlemen, it is the beginning of the year, and of course, we cannot have the beginning of the year without requiring you all to pull out your crystal balls and take a look into the future and make some predictions. So, Scott, we'll start with you. A couple of predictions for 2022. What do you think is going to happen in the land of GitOps?
Land of GitOps. First of all, Victor and Tommy both missed the clickbait opportunity. I'm going to help you guys out. Linus was wrong. Long live SVN. No, I'm just kidding. It's all Git. 2022. Man, I wish my prediction could be people will start getting that. There's even a question in our Q&A here about where does enterprise architecture sit in DevOps, and I think DevOps, it's hilarious that people are like, wait, I heard about this DevOps thing. How can I get into it? And it's all defined in there already. Like almost every role that you could have in an organization is already in there. It's just how you're changing your behavior and what you do to be part of the DevOps lifecycle or the GitOps lifecycle. So I really wish my prediction could be, majority of companies are going to figure out that they need to change how they're doing things, not necessarily what they're doing, to help promote this DevOps thing, because it works, right? DevOps works when you integrate the priorities and progress and activities in the right way, and you're part of the flow and not just some weird offshoot off the side of the DevOps Mobius. But my actual prediction is going to be, we're probably going to see a bunch more Log4j fun times this year, since it's getting lots of attention.
All right, I got a prediction and a rant. Awesome. Andy.
Sorry. I definitely predict I will have to answer the question, what is GitOps, at least 1,000 more times this year. And it will probably change every time I answer it. I definitely think we'll see a lot more content like this, a lot more talking about what it means, how we're going to use it, and hopefully by the end of the year, come to an understanding that it is a tool. It's a pattern that we can adopt as part of our, continuing culture shift towards DevOps. Yeah.
All right. Victor, you got a prediction? What do you think?
I don't anticipate any like a big bang situations in 2020. I think one of the things what I personally wanted to see is to have more kind of integrated type of solutions. What we see in the past, there's plenty of different distribution of, for example, of Kubernetes, right? And some of them good with the additional like a monitoring enabled. Some of them have a nice installer that allows you to deploy more clusters. I think once those the tools for implementing GitOps will be part of the integrated platform, as we know, the Kubernetes is a platform for building platforms that will allows developer to adopt this quicker, and the company who will nail this this developer experience that will provide something that would be at some point some opinionated, but to the point that also needs to be flexible. That would be like a great year for Linux on the desktops. It's going to be a great year for GitOps in the Kubernetes clusters, I think. And if you want to have like some crazy prediction, I think integration with some hyper automation tools and plugging in artificial intelligence bits to analyzing your GitHub repositories and suggesting you different workflow strategies to deploy. That would be really cool for developer experience and for like initial introduction of the GitOps.
All right, so instead of GitOps, we'll have GodOps because we already have them, right?
Bad jokes for the win.
Tommy, what's your predictions?
And I think this is going to be the year where a bunch of people jump in. Different companies say, "Hey, I want to give GitOps a try," and they're going to realize that it's not as straightforward as they thought. I think the conversation is there. More conversations like this are going to happen. They'll jump in and realize, oh, there's a lot to this that we need to understand and figure out. I think we're going to see the emergence of different levels of abstractions that blend infrastructure as code and code seamlessly. Environments as a service is something that we're doing at release that does that. And I think you're going to see more of those things where you bring your environment definition, your code definition, you bring them together, and the CD side of that automatically takes place. And I do think you're going to start seeing some tooling and testing around how do I test the things that I've done in GitOps? Like, how do I test that when I make this change that it's actually going to manifest itself exactly the way that I want it into my cloud providers? And I think ultimately this isn't going to happen necessarily in 2022, but it's pushing towards this idea that clouds are commodities a bit. And ultimately, if I can define my infrastructure in one cloud and the other, the cloud is a commodity, and that higher level abstraction of defining my application and the necessary, infrastructure that goes with it, that'll be coming in the future. And so I think this year is the year that people play around with it, figure out it's difficult, and then the emergence of platforms like environments as a service, like we're doing at release, are going to start to become more prevalent than they are today.
All right, Victor, I got time for one more question I'm going to ask you. If somebody gave you a magic wand, it's the magic GitOps wand, and you could fix or change any one thing, what would it be?
I think people just need to start automating things. The one thing is just like, stop researching, stop making excuses, just do this, just do it. That's going to be like the magic thing. Just like once you start doing the thing, you start developing this less fear to what something will break. Just do it.
All right. Guys, do you guys agree with that? Because, basically without endorsing a sneaker company, I mean, basically he's saying just go do it, right?
It's more from the Starsky and Hutch, but hey, yeah.
I completely agree. You've got to dive in and see what works for you. And the only way to do that is to start. So I think a lot of times people want to talk about the pluses, the minuses. And I think GitOps is this perfect example of it's going to be, custom in a way to everybody's own situation. So what works for one might not work for the other. So you just got to see it for yourself.
I'm going to actually disagree a little bit and say, do it if you have a problem to solve. Like, sure. If you have something that's working and you've already automated and you have a different workflow or a different strategy that's working for you, don't do it.
There you go. Hey, at the very least, you should try it to see what it's all about. And if you don't need it, that's fine, but at least you'll know one way or the other.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Gentlemen, thank you for sharing your knowledge and your insights. That was awesome. I want to thank everybody else for being with us today, and I'm going to hand it back to our moderator.
Thank you, Mike. I just want to give a quick reminder to our audience that today's session was recorded. So if you missed any of it or you just like to share it around with your friends, you will receive a link to access that on demand shortly after the webinar concludes. And you can also find it living on the DevOps website within about 24 hours. So real quick, I'm going to announce our Amazon gift card winners. This is for $25 gift cards. Our first winner is Sam K. Our second winner is Akil D. Our third winner is Daniel R. And our fourth and final winner is Christine N. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim those gift cards. And if you don't find an email, just check your spam folder. So Scott, Tommy, Andy, Victor, and Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today, for sharing your expertise, for giving a nice in-depth conversation for a topic that really hasn't had a whole lot of light shed upon it until just recently. So thank you guys for being here with me today. I'd like to thank DevOps.com for sponsoring today's webinar. And my final thanks goes to you, our audience. So thank you for being here with us today. Please fill out our post-webinar survey. And this is Cody J. Brown signing off. Have an excellent day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.